If you look closely, you'll find something tragic was happening.
Are you interested in writing something for us?
I don't do assignments anymore.
Yeah, well, you're a better writer than most people do anything. Have you heard the tapes?
No. Of what?
Sanford Police Department, this is Sean.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy. Looks like he's up to no good or something.
I want to be in the story and build a thesis that shows how all of this is linked. It was all lies. They knew we weren't inferior. You don't escape trauma by ignoring it. You escape trauma by confronting it. I don't write questions. I write answers.
About a boy. I read about a boy of 17, tall, smart, and kind, with a quiet smile, with a caramel-coated baby face, and black, like mine. I read about a boy who was suited for soaring and pursuing his dreams, who was adored by his mother, his father, and his brother. I read about a boy who walked freely in a city, who had no use for darkness in 46, not even for 42. I read about a boy who craved the comfort of a cold drink and rainbow-colored candy out on a typical teenage task one night in February when the unimaginable awaited. About a mother. I read about a mother and her love for her son of 17, tall, smart, and kind, with a quiet smile, with a caramel-coated baby face, and black, like mine. I read about a mother who navigated his life focused on better days. I read about a mother in pain from the absence, in the presence of now and forever, again and again. I read about a mother vertigoing into the world and holding on to something useful, like the unabbreviated truth that there is still beauty in speaking his name. I read about his mother.
It's Jay, back in for another one. And today I have with me
Sebrenia.
The way you say
I don't know if you're going to introduce me or not. So, Sebrenia.
All right. All right. So this set of reviews, this is on purpose a trilogy in a way of 3 Black / African American quote unquote movies that we've recently seen. The first one we saw on accident together. The second one we saw on purpose. The third one we saw it separately. And we are here today to discuss the movie Origin.
Yes.
Now, this is directed by Ava DuVernay, which I love her work, by the way. To give a quick synopsis, the unspoken system that has shaped America and chronicles how lives today are defined by hierarchy and human divisions. This movie, Origins, what did you think about this movie?
I liken it to an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
I thought it was gripping. It was sad. And, at some points it was always informative because that was the premise of the whole movie, or the reason for it. It wasn't what I was interested, because obviously the book Caste is like, it's a big book, and everybody expected that to be more of a documentary if anybody's going to make a film on it. So just the fact that they made it a film that wasn't a documentary was interesting too. Like, what is she going to do with this book? I walked away from that movie, I don't know, I just my head was full, and it was just kind of like, she just did a really good job with this movie.
Yeah.
She just really did a really good job with this movie. And it was another full circle kind of situation. Like, she started one way and she ended that way. And it was just a really, really good movie, Yeah,
I really liked it as well. It's one of those kind of movies I knew was going to be heavy going in. And depending on how I was feeling, it'd be the kind of movies I would think, like, maybe I'll wait until I feel like I'm ready to see it. But when I saw that was Ava directing it, like, I trust her work. I trust how she handles a lot of heavy subject matters, and every time she does, it seems like she always finds, at least for my tolerance level, the perfect way to kind of share that story without being too heavy-handed. Like, she finds no pleasure in the heartache of it. She finds no pleasure in the tragedy of it, but she will bring it out and let you know. And I think I told you before, it's like a big sister that's holding your hand, and she knows the way through the haunted maze and knows when to tell you to close your eyes, or you could look at this part, or close your eyes on this part, I have you. I always feel like with her movies, she's kind of like that. It's like, I'm not going to try to hurt you. I'll get you through this safely, but I want you to come with me, but I'll be your guide. And so I felt like that with the movie. I wasn't familiar with the book Caste, but I did see an interview with her talking about the movie and how hard it was for them to get it made, and how she had to go independent with it, and how the story is important, and trying to get permission, because it deals with the story of Trayvon Martin. And when I first heard that, I'm like, oh no, I can't sit up and see nothing like that, But just all the stuff that he went through to tell this story, and then to find out how, like you were saying, it was almost kind of like the way the information in the book is, how would this be a movie? And just her working it out and cracking the code to make it into a way where it could be consumed in this way. I had to see how that magic was going to be done. I was just curious. So it wasn't necessarily a hard sell on the interview, but it was enough that made me want to at least try to check it out. I enjoyed it. Like I said, it wasn't an easy movie, but one of those kind of movies you kind of laugh and you kind of cry, and you're taken back by something you saw, something just so sweet, and something else is so heartbreaking, but it never leaves you beat down. You know what I mean? So it's almost kind of like, okay, you failed, now get up, let's keep going. This truth that's hard, but I'm just showing you, let's keep going. So it was just one of those kind of things. And it was just like I said, I felt full too. I felt drained a little bit, but it was almost kind of like I didn't feel destroyed, I felt like almost kind of like how you get hurt and your skin is just a little bit tougher right there. You know what I mean? You're not wounded to the point where you can't move anymore. You're up and out and about and stuff, but you're just a little bit tougher and a little bit wiser, because of the journey that kind of took a little bump. And that's okay, as long as you can kind of grow from it.
I think it almost makes you feel like she got a standing ovation at the Cannes Festival. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard. But it's almost like you want to thank her. Like, thank you for taking this on. You know what I mean? Thank you for doing the work, that nobody else wants to do. Thank you for making it a responsibility, that you've placed upon yourself with all of these films, to be that person for us and fight the good fight to make sure that these movies are out there,
Yeah. It's very similar to me in a way of Fruitvale Station, and how that movie kind of gave humanity to Oscar Grant. It wasn't like he was like, oh, he's this drug dealer, knucklehead, blah, blah, blah. No, he was a person. He was a father. He was somebody's partner, so just the humanity in this movie, at least humanity, how it was taken away, and also how people still had humanity in spite of, the situations and the things that they were put through. It was very interesting. We both liked it. Would you suggest this to people to check out?
I would definitely, it's layers of it, because I would definitely suggest this. I have the book, I probably have it on Audible too. I know it's going to take some time, for me to really focus on reading it. You know what I mean? It's not one of those things where you're just going to, run through it really quick, because there's going to be parts where you're going to have to kind of sit with yourself for a moment. But I've also started I have the Master's Class app, and she has a class, and I started that, and already, she's talking about how she didn't have a filmmaking background. She didn't go to school for it. She just knew she wanted to make a film. She talks about her preparation. She speaks to, if you've come here to see me make a film, then we can do that. But this is also like metaphors for life, and two of the things that she mentioned is how she prepares. And, one of the things is like soft prep, where she's like, that's the idea of what you want and all of those great things. And then she goes into hard prep of like, this is it. This is go time. Right. She talked about how she, will view other films and see how she wants to kind of relay that information in the films that she wants. Just really in-depth information in the sense of like, that's that argument of like, you don't have to go to film school to be a filmmaker, so that's always going to be an argument for folks. But like, I think it's similar to what we were saying about the other movies. Like, if you want to do something and that's what your calling is, if that's what speaks to you, you find a way to get it done. And I appreciate that about her because of the work that she's done, because of what we've seen her resume, and it just gets better every time, so.
And what's funny that kind of relates to that is that all the directors for all three of these movies are either first time directors or kind of self-taught directors that kind of just did their own thing. And it shows in the type of movies that they are. Right. All three of them had that in common. They didn't necessarily go to school for it. They had an idea that they wanted to do, and they worked it out. They put the pieces together and worked it out. Yeah. I know Ava's one of her first ones was Welcome to the Good Life, about the Good Life Cafe that's in Southern California with hip hop back in the day. And she was a poet / like rapper, her and her partner. Yeah, she won me over with that movie. After that, I was like, and that was like more like a documentary kind of thing, which to me could be more challenging than an actual movie when you talk about wrangling people and trying to get stories out of them and layering all the stories and finding a narrative. At least with a movie, you chose what your narrative is versus the documentary makes itself. Right. You know what I mean? You just got, I didn't expect for this part to be so important, but now it is. And this part that I thought was going to be the big main thing, it's not. It's a moving target with a documentary situation. It can be, depending what's included or what's the new piece that's put in there. Not the character you built to fit. It's like, this is a character that don't fit. I got to figure out how to get it in or remove it. So
yeah, it's more or less like turn on the camera and just watch it work. Watch what happens.
Right. I don't know. So how you want to go about this?
I think it's so many pieces and parts and layers that like, I feel like it needs to be maybe like structured in the sense of like, beginning to, you know what I mean? I don't want to miss any kind of parts of it.
Okay. So she's a writer that's trying to get out of writing.
Right. Exactly.
Which is usually how it goes. Reluctantly getting pulled into something. Somebody who sees something in you, and even though you want out, they want you in. And so I kind of thought that was kind of interesting how that went. Kind of familiar in a way too. And sometimes I think what made her so, right for that situation was the fact that she's reluctant. And Blair Underwood, a friend of hers, was trying to get her to come back to write the story. And the story is supposed to be about the murder of Trayvon Martin and wanted her perspective on it. And it was funny because I'm not for sure how it was in the actual book, but in the movie, she was getting tired of being called to write those kind of stories because they were heavy and starting to get depressing and stuff like that. And it was funny because the director of American Fiction, he was a journalist, and he said he went through the same thing. Like, hey, I got tired of being the black guy who had to explain stuff to people when bad things happen. It's like bad stuff is just bad stuff, and it was just wrong. And people are looking to him to give an interpretation instead of really just fixing the problem. So I thought it was interesting hearing him say that in real life, and then seeing his character say the same kind of thing, going through the same kind of thing, and trying to say something else. Like with all artists, when you kind of don't want to do something, you try to find a way to make it relatable and find something about it that encourages you and inspires you to give it the attention that it needs. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like you find something to love or something about it to propel you forward, because sometimes your head says no, but your heart might say yes. And with that kind of push you forward to be able to do things that you probably wouldn't normally do for yourself, but you find something bigger than you to do it for. So
I think that's a good point about how, that she was asked over and over again to write. It was specifically because of her having a Pulitzer Prize, because he mentioned that too. She was like, anybody can, not anybody, but someone else can write it. And he was like, not someone like you. You know what I mean? You have a Pulitzer Prize. We'd like to see your angle of it, which, you can imagine is probably thinking of how piling that on and think about how difficult that article could have been for her to write just on that. Then thinking like it has to be worthy of this award that she had won, with also dealing with the fact that she's African American and she has to relate to this time, this story that happens over and over and over again. You know what I mean? And dealing with the pain of it and then writing a good article, but not just a good article, a great article. That's scary for anybody. You know what I mean? That's like just being on your job and someone telling you need to do something, to the best of your ability that is on the standard of someone else. It's similar to that for her. Like, I can't just write an article. It has to be Pulitzer Prize worthy,
Yeah. It's interesting how if somebody tells somebody no, you would think that the respectful thing would be just to let it go.
Right.
Would be just to let it go and to, I guess, kind of go along with the wishes of the person who's saying they don't want to be bothered. But I thought it was very powerful. Blair Underwood character gave her a tape of the 911 call, the actual 911 call, and just told her to listen to it and then decide after that. And it was so powerful the way she shot it, where they're playing the audio, and I believe the audio is real audio, but it's playing the audio, and then alongside that did kind of an interpretation of what was going on, as far as like, Trayvon talking on the phone to his friend. He noticed somebody's following him, even going to the store to get the Skittles and all that. It was just well done, but it started getting kind of thick in there when just seeing the whole thing, just the hoodie in the store and all that, because you know what's going to happen, but you don't know how you're going to get it. You don't know if it's going to be presented like in a way where it's going to be like, you're going to see the whole situation right now, or is it going to book in or what? But it's a lot of one step forward, 2 steps back to breathe, 3 steps forward, 1 step back to breathe. And so you see that this whole thing touches her, and she's like, because everybody's thinking like this is going to be, just a easy case closed kind of thing, like, of course that guy was wrong. Of course that kid didn't do it, I think that even though it seemed like that, and we heard the same thing that she heard, with the way things are here, it wasn't far-fetched to think like that's not going to make a difference, because we've seen plenty of situations where we thought common sense or whatever, or logic or whatever, and we find out over and over again that justice works differently depending on many factors, but we've seen plenty of examples of where it don't quite work out the way we think it's going to work out.
I think that it speaks to what you said before. We're kind of used to the other shoe dropping, you know what I mean? When I heard about it, I think I mentioned to you, when I heard about Trayvon Martin, I realized that there was some familiarity with it, in a sense of him growing up in the area that I grew up in Miami, and his mom going to the same school that I went to, and then my son being the same age, or around the same age as him, really just kind of hit home a lot. But for me to be able to walk through that the way that we did, we heard about it, we heard the tapes, and we visualized this kid, but to see it on film was just gripping. You couldn't leave, if you wanted to, because you had to see it. You had to be there for it, because he couldn't leave. He didn't know what was coming next. We did, so like, to see step by step how that occurred, and to see the fear, and to hear the phone call, of the resident, calling and saying that they hear a kid, or they hear someone out there, we could clearly hear that it was a young person screaming for help.
Right.
So the absurdity of him being found not guilty is absurd. But then again, it's Florida, and it's that part of Florida, which is notorious for lynchings and stuff like that. So, can't excuse why that verdict came back the way that it did, because it just doesn't make any sense. But to see that in the film, and now it's like, well, you all saw it yourself and you see how this is. So what do you think? You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't much to think about because we knew what we thought about it, but it was just like, we don't have to say anything about it. I'm just showing you what happened. Now let's move on to the next thing. And it was just so many layers of that kind of stuff where there was, that part, and then just the things that she experienced, the writer experienced at the same time was interesting.
Yeah. Like I said, hearing that kind of sparked her to accept the assignment. It just kind of turned to a bigger and bigger thing. But with that, her mom wasn't doing well. So it's a kind of a situation where she's going to have to be a caregiver for her mom. It was interesting with her. And they introduced her husband, played by John Berthal. The lead is played by Aunjanue Ellis-Taylor. She plays Isabel. So she's in an interracial relationship. I thought it was very interesting how John, who played the character Brett, the way his role was in that. I thought it was just very interesting how supportive he was and kind of understanding of the situation, because they kind of showed him interacting with her family and her mom and stuff. And I thought it was very cool how he wasn't really imposing himself. Like if he had something to say or felt a certain kind of way about something, he would say it. But also, he kind of knew when to stay out of it. And sometimes that's just as important as coming in to save, is knowing when just to bow out and let things kind of go the way they go. But things that kind of stood out to me is like when she said she didn't want to do the article, and he kind of looked at her. And even though he felt a certain kind of way, he saved it for the ride home. He didn't try to, in front of her, embarrass her or say, oh, you don't got nothing going on, or you said you're going to do this. And then also how he was with her mom, who wasn't doing well and needed assistance to be, put into a wheelchair, and how he's picking her up and helping her. And I just thought it was really, really cool how that was played. And so, like I said, we just got a chance to see her getting mentally prepared to what she was going to do and figuring out her angle. And she came across this thing that she heard about like the caste system. Well, her take on it was that the caste system was bigger than racism, because the way people were being treated was happening in other places, even where places where everybody was the same race. And so that was her kind of take, and she went to travel around to investigate, I guess, to test her hypothesis. So she went to different places, learning and hearing about different stories to tie it in. And so I thought it was interesting too how the use of other things to make her point. And like we discussed before, I had kind of mixed feelings about mixing narratives sometimes, because sometimes they don't always line up. Like they're similar, but in certain ways they're different. And sometimes being anchored to something else, they might have a weakness that you don't, but it brings the whole thing down if you tie yourself to it. And so sometimes with certain things, you should just kind of keep it separate. But that was her way of finding a connection. And so I think she did a good job of paralleling different cultures, like from India, and then also with stuff with the Jewish culture and what they dealt with Germany. Yeah. So what did you think about her traveling around and discovery and her investigation?
So what I thought was they made it plain. The whole thing was just made plain. I think that, I don't know if we're into the spoilers yet,
yeah.
But, the way that she would tell the story, she was telling us a story, and it had a visual, aspect to it. It was lyrical in the way that she related. It had you just kind of like, as if you were sitting in a classroom.
Yeah.
Or sitting in a lecture hall, but it was just like, and you had purposely went to that lecture. You know what I mean? Not like you had to go, the fact that she would just kind of break into, like, look at this picture.
Yeah.
You see this person in this picture. You know what I mean? It wasn't like she was telling us she was going to do that. We just saw a picture, and then there was a story behind it. I thought that was beautiful. And, it really made me feel connected, in a way, because I like storytelling, so for her to film it that way was the lure for us to just keep hanging in there, because there's more, more of that coming.
Yeah, it was definitely like set up like a conference that she actually attended. It was almost like we were in the audience, but then we also got a chance to hang out with her behind the scenes to see how that stuff came. So the transitions was really, really smooth, and I like the style of it a lot.
I like the fact that it could have just been a whole kind of analytical film where we only saw her doing research, talking to, the folks that she was doing research with. But to keep bringing in the family aspect of it, the plain folk, you know what I mean, in that world was incredible. Like, but I'm still me. I'm still this person. You know what I mean? I've had the opportunity to rise to this level and be amongst the, most elite, folks. But like, those are my people. And when I need comforting and I need self-care, I go to them. And that was her husband, her mom, and her cousin, and I liken that to, when I think about life, sometimes I think about, I have a panel, you know what I mean? And, it's a visualization, it's a visual panel, like everybody brings something different to the, the table, if you will. But when I think about things that I need some kind of encouragement on, I think about those people. And I know that I'm going to be able to get some, good advice and all of that in return. And I feel like she had that. It was, 3 solid people that would tell her, and center her. And I enjoyed that part about the film as well. I really thought that was a great aspect.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I like the fact that the people that she did go to, like her cousin and her mom and her husband, they had different perspectives, and they were all right too, Everybody kind of knew how to move with her. Like her cousin was straight talk. Her husband was kind of encouraging and truth teller, but not being pushy about it, because he kind of knew how he had to move with her. And the mom was kind of like, she slipped out truth, but she didn't press. Like, she'll say stuff under her breath, but she meant what she said, but she's not going to argue about it. You know what I mean? So it was interesting how everybody had their way of giving information to her and sharing stuff, but they did it in different ways. It's interesting how those pillars she lost. And even though, in a way they propelled her when they were here, they did just as much pushing, guiding, and encouraging after they left as well. Like, she used that, but I thought it was beautifully done the way Ava showed her being lost and like going through depression to kind of finding her way back. Because they did stop for that, it wasn't like this clean little, I'm over it and got you on my back, let's go. It's just like, I ain't gonna lie. When I saw her laying there and the camera's to the side and you got the leaves and it's like dark in the background, I said, this reminds me of an art exhibit.
Right.
Wiley.
Right.
I'm like, huh.
Right. It was beautiful.
I ain't saying it wasn't beautiful.
Absolute, yeah.
I said it's confirmation. That's what I'm saying.
Right. It was once she did that, it was kind of like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? Not in a bad sense, but just kind of like, because that's the way the movie went from scene to scene. You know what I mean? It just flowed into different avenues. And when she did that, you saw the leaves, and then you saw her and the mom. My daughter was with me and she grabbed my hand. It was just so emotional. It was so like breathtaking. It just took your breath away. It was like an art exhibit. It really was.
I'm sure she was inspired by his exhibit. I'm sure. Like I said, that's when I saw it. As soon as I saw that, I thought of you, and I started kind of laughing. Not laughing, ha ha, but just like, ain't that something? But it was so powerful and it was beautiful. And really, there's so many ways that could have been done. And I think that was the way that I could take it best, only because I wouldn't want to see her screaming or falling apart or whatever. Like, sometimes the abstract is the best way to represent something. You know what I mean? Because I don't think any words would be able to encapsulate where she was in herself at that moment like that.
Right.
And just kind of reaching out wanting to see them again. Beautiful.
And it's the order of grief too, because you know, we've all had that experience when someone passes obviously earlier than you thought they were going to pass. You know, that's not our control. You know, you feel like, you know, but you're supposed to be here to help me deal with A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You know what I mean? Like her husband was gone, you know, and they're prepping for the mom to leave, you know, and now they're dealing with basically, she's dealing with this thing that just, you know, she had no clue would occur at that time. You know, he might have been sickly and all of those things, but I'm sure she depended on him to do what he was doing. He was helping her care for her mom, you know. And so, you know, and then, you know, here comes the mom. And I really appreciated the fact that she showed her in bed, unable to function, just curled up, you know, almost in the fetus, you know, position. But she took that time to be like, you know, this is real. This is real life. This is how a person would react when these things happen to them. You know, they can't move. They can't do anything. And for her, you know, let's talk about Niecy Nash.
Brilliant. That could have been her sister.
Yes. She, you know, they clapped for her in the theater. I was in at the end. They kept saying Niecy like she was in there. Like she was just so flawless in the sense of like you said, like she, like you said, like it was a real relative. Like, oh, let me go over here and take care of, you know, my sister. You know,
as soon as I saw her and I saw Aunjanue, I was like, yeah, like that. They actually family. That makes sense. She could have, like I said, she could have said that was her sister, and I'd be like, yes.
Exactly. You know, and the way that she talked to her, it's that kind of like, we're cousins, but we're really sisters. That was, and that's how that goes,
especially with families in the South and just kind of growing up. I have siblings that are my cousins that don't tell us different. You know, we're siblings. Those are my brothers and sisters. And so yeah, to see that done that well, like I said, it's just like when stuff is in the right hands. We were just talking about siblings and stuff in American fiction, and it's just funny how in the right hands, these simple things that could be just write-offs and whatever, they're putting something in there where it's just like, this is another level. This is something else. It looks familiar, but it's not what you're used to seeing, and it's just amazing and a pleasure to witness.
We talked about the sibling aspect, the mother aspect, and the Trayvon Martin part in American fiction and Origin. It had those tie-ins with those two films. One thing I did like about what Niecy Nash did, there was like a scene where there was a picnic, and you know, she was listening to her cousin talk, but she was walking in front of her and talking to everybody else around, like, oh, you need me to fix you a plate? You know, like, here's your plate, here's your, you know. And I'm like, is she not listening to this sister? Like, she's spitting out some like knowledge here, and she's just like taking care of everybody, you know, in the family. And then they finally sit down and she's like, now make it plain. Now go out and talk to some real people and make it plain so people can understand it. She heard everything she was saying, but she was still, as she took care of her, she was taking care of everybody else in that family as well.
But once again, that's her being a great director and writer and knowing to put that in there. Because the truth is, that's how parents, that's how my mom dealt with it. That's how I deal with my family. You know, I'm multitasking all the time. Who's sitting down just doing one thing ever? And to know to put that in there and how so much stuff could be told at the same time, you know, it's just brilliant. And not all directors do it, but sometimes you might see a director who will have people over talking each other. And that's not normally what you would do in a movie because it's like, you know, it's mucky because it's like cross sound. But that's realistic. People talk over each other. People, it's not like, I say this, then you say that. And somebody might say something like, yeah, that's right, or sound effects, all that kind of stuff. And those are like little things that doesn't take much, but it's so real that you would think on paper it wouldn't be right, but it's so normal that you wouldn't think twice about it. And it would just make you feel that much more connected to it because it's not clean. It's the it's the bumpy real, you know what I mean? And so those little things like that really stood out. And to just know that it'll work, or even if you didn't know, to try it, to have it in there, because that could have been just her sitting there the whole time looking at her blankly when
Right.
you got a chance to see the family and her interaction and how she could juggle a whole bunch of stuff and she could manage stuff at the same time. So that only thing that did was confirm to me that she knew what she was talking about when she gave her answer.
Right. Exactly.
Versus just
Exactly.
dumbfounded.
Right.
Do she know?
Right.
Don't.
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, yeah, she don't play. And obviously she's the person everybody goes to and she makes sure they're taken care of even if they're not.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's who she's speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
And she told all that was just showing that scene.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Incredible.
Yeah. It was dope. It was dope. Another scene that stuck out to me is when she realized she had a problem with her house. It's a leak. I thought it was beautiful how they folded in the metaphor of the house and things that you see that are there but needs to be taken care of and not just ignoring it. You know what I mean? Like you can, and people might say just skip by it, but you know, just ignoring things that you know to be a problem instead of avoiding starting with those things. But so she has a journey of trying to, you know, get the house pulled together so she could sell it because after her mom passing, and she has a guy coming in to take a look at it to give an estimate to see what the problem is, what's going on with it. And the guy kind of gives her an answer, but she knows that he says he's probably got like a water leak or whatever over there, and she kind of looks at him like she doesn't believe him. And so I thought it was very powerful, interesting, and relatable. The fact that, you know, she starts off some small talk, and then she started talking about, oh, my mom died. You have your family, and so it's just like, and he has a MAGA hat on, so I thought it was kind of funny that he has this blatant MAGA hat on. He's coming into the house of a black woman, not even thinking to take the hat off, right? Or care to take the hat off, or felt that he needed to. And so she's trying to like, one, should I kick this guy out? But she's thinking probably two, like I need him. And she's thinking like, should I take something about the hat? And she's like, no, man, I could go around this other way. So she had to make herself human. Like, I have a mom, you have a mom. I have a dad, you have a dad. To have him relate to her. When she talked about the fathers, and he's talking about like, oh, at least you got your dad around. He's like, well, you know, that mean dude, like, you know, it'd be better off if he wasn't here. That was enough to be like, shook him and be like, you know what, let me go check this out and let me take a good look at it. And it's just like, once again, like in American fiction, the normal stuff that folks might be going through that's like passive aggressive or denial or something that is normally just written off like it's in your head, like, the guy's a professional. Why don't you believe what he said? And we know better. You know what I mean? But this showed how the truth was he was giving her less because of who she was. And it was shown in the movie.
And also with that, if we use the metaphor of the hat, I mean, it was what it was. Yeah. But if we think about how we talk about we wear different hats in life, right? Yeah. So you could visually, if you think visually, see him taking off that hat. You know what I mean? He didn't do it, but once she said my mother, it changed. You know, then he turned into a son. You know what I mean? And then when he talked about his father, he was still a son. And then like you said, at the end of that conversation, he's like, oh, well, maybe it's this over here. Yeah, you know,
because he didn't see nothing that they had together at all. Like I said, she had to humanize herself, but she was smart enough to read the room to know that's what she had to do to make it right, which is interesting because we didn't see it at the time, but later on there's a flashback where this gentleman that was trying to help her out was trying to screw her over, and her soon-to-be husband, wasn't her husband at the time, just a neighbor, saw that the guy wasn't doing her right and stepped in and be like, hey man, she paid for this, right? So yeah, adults need to be picked up and taken then, right? Right. Like, what's wrong with these kids? What's wrong with these people? So we saw her with a man in her life to step in, and we saw her without one. But she had to she had the same situation, but she had to maneuver differently. Right. Because he was not there. So they kind of showed both sides of that, which I thought was interesting. And it didn't have to be shown, but then it also shows about, you know, her position, where she's at and what she's dealing with. So as far as like for us to get closer and to know more of her, it said a lot, even though it was an outside thing that could have been in the movie or not. But it was still nice to see.
With the part about her traveling, it was interesting because at some point she was talking to her cousin, and she was like, oh, I'm getting ready to go somewhere. And she's like, where you going? You know, like, you're supposed to be kind of resting. She was like, I gotta work. Like, it's only me now. I'm the only one here, and I have to take care of myself. And for some people, self-care is getting up and going back to what, you know, what you're used to, or what feels familiar. And it might not be self-care for us because it's work, right? But for her, that's where she lived. That's who she was before she got married. She was, you know, an older woman when she married this man. She wasn't like, you know, some young person that was reliant on this other person. She was a independent woman, and she just was like, I gotta go to work.
Another scene that really stood out to me that was very powerful was her mental and physical transformation before she had to go into a crowd of people, when she had to go kind of do her little mingling thing to talk about the story that she was writing. And you could see that she didn't want to be there, her stress, and she just fixed her face to smile, and she walked in there confident. She went in there hunched over, broken and sad. And just like I said, that close-up of her just transforming into being the person she had to be for that moment was just so powerful. And it was sad too, because you knew that's not what she was. We saw what she was before she had to transform. And so just kind of remind you of the faces that we have to put on to deal with certain kind of things in spite of how we might actually be feeling and going through. Because, you know, not everybody's going to care about our personal problems and situations. You know, they still want from us what they want from us, and things still move on with or without us, just like she had said to her cousin, you know. So it was interesting for that to be shown. I love moments that are normally stuff that you would not see, but you know happen. I love when somebody has the mind's eye to capture those things and present them, because like I said, that could have been easily cut out. Like, we don't need that. We don't need a transition of her getting mentally prepped to go deal with this stuff. You know, we already saw her in the bed. Now she's out, so we know she's fine. They could have easily cut that out. But that was in there, and it was powerful. And it caught me when I saw that. Like, I know that. You know, I know that.
I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know who you're touching when you show stuff like that. Because I know that as well. You know what I mean? And she had to do it because that was work.
Yeah.
You know, and at that level where you got to show up to parties. You know, this was, you know, probably a cocktail party or something, but she had to show up in that form, dressed, makeup done, all of those things that you don't even want to get out of bed to do. So that was incredible. That was great.
Yeah. Another scene I thought was very interesting was when she was traveling and she had the conversation with the couple talking about slavery, slaves and the Jews. Not only was the conversation interesting, how it was put, the way they were different, which I thought was very powerful, and I never thought of it that way. But that also kind of lent to my feelings about kind of mixing up narratives with things, because sometimes it's just everybody got their thing, and to each person or each culture or group or whatever will feel a certain kind of way about it. And so sometimes it shouldn't even be a thing to compare. It's just like, I'm dealing with my house. Not to say the hole in my roof isn't as bad as the hole in your roof, but I'm the one calling for the estimates and having somebody come check it out. So since they're in my house, this is the thing that we're dealing with right now. And to throw in other stuff, it's just very, you know, but it was a powerful and interesting conversation. I thought it was funny how her cousin kind of got on her because she got kind of stuck because she didn't quite have the answer. And that's how it could be sometimes. Sometimes we are in situations to answer things that it's not a simple answer. We're so used to getting things quickly and simplified, that if you live long enough, you know most things aren't. And so if you actually care, or you're a person that care enough to give like a full, deep answer, it's not one of those things that you could just pull out and have, because you know it's going to be a bigger conversation that you probably don't have time to get into, or you don't feel like getting into it at that moment, or you just don't feel like you're equipped to deal with it at the time. And so to show that she didn't have all the answers at the time needed, and the fact that it wasn't an easy journey for her discovery for these things, or to have these conversations, or to trying to find her way through it, was very cool to see that it was dealt like that. You know, like she definitely earned her perspective and her narrative. It wasn't like, I'm just gonna patch this together with that. No. And the thing about it is having these bumps or having these discussions that were uncomfortable or trying to understand what things mean, because sometimes things being a little tougher for you make you understand really what's in it or really what you're dealing with, because sometimes you be in more trouble by underestimating how deep, how hard, how strong something is. So it's best to already know what that is so you can actually know how to deal with it. And so that was kind of part of her journey. And I like how they showed that. It wasn't just like she came and she had all the right answers and this is that. Some of the stuff was questioned. Some of the stuff was, laid easily. And it was like this, but you saw the mind working on trying to piece together the answers. And it didn't all fit pretty, and it shouldn't have to, but to see that journey, that creative journey of putting the pieces together was nice to see. It was very refreshing, and to me that felt more authentic than just all these pieces fitting together the first time.
Well, I saw it from a perspective of like when that conversation first started, the confidence that she had from all of the experience that she's had being a Black woman, African American woman, doing her research and all of those things and saying it so seamlessly, this is what happened to us. And that person coming back with the strength of a bull and being like, well, this happened to us. Yeah. And then it was, well, at least you had that. Well, at least you had that, it became a comparison. And I think she was so agoshed by it, like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I wasn't expecting this, that it was like, people don't usually argue this point with me, but we're talking about being in a different country where people have had their own atrocities. So it is like you said, you're in my house, you're not even at home. You know what I mean? Like we could have this argument in your house over there, but it would still be the same argument because this is the way I feel about my people. Exactly. And when she said this amount suffered these atrocities, and that perfect line that she said was, this is years. There's no number for us. Yeah. The number for us is 0. We can't count the amount of people who were murdered and killed and, all the things that happened to us. Yeah. So everybody was correct. But I think it was interesting because I didn't look at it like when she was going through that moment, like, you need to say more. I looked at it like there's no right here because both sides are very, feeling very strong about their opinion of this. And it was interesting when she talked to her cousin and her cousin was like, I told you, leave them Jewish people alone. You know what I mean? Just like, don't get in that position and be combative in a sense. It wasn't even a combative thing because she was saying if it was me, I would have, but it wasn't even a situation like that. It was just two people having a conversation about the realizations of what has happened to, within their cultures.
Yeah, because even her cousin was saying, you usually have something to say so quick. And she said, why didn't you just say that in the first place? While you was talking to her?
Right.
Well, like I said, they both wasn't wrong. It was just a different perspective. But also, like I said, it kind of went to my point of the fact that you can always just put stuff together and piggyback stuff. Because sometimes it's not, it's not your roof. It's not everybody's situation. And sometimes it matters things lining up. And sometimes when it's not, it throws everything off,
Sometimes
it's always comfortable. It's not always.
It's a time to just be quiet. Sometimes it's just a time for pause and just kind of learn from the experience because we all learn from it. We learned something from seeing that scene. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Of like, this is not the time to fight. I mean, they're not fighting. They're both, they both feel very strongly about their experiences, but we've learned from each person's experience, what happened, not necessarily the personal thing that happened to them, just in general, what happened on both sides. Yeah.
So I think she needed to hit that wall with that situation. But like I said, that would have been my thing to be like, that's why you keep it. That's why you stay on your own line about stuff. But like I said, she kind of needed to see that because she was trying to find ways to make it connect. So when it's presented, because even in a movie, it kind of presented like when a tragedy is happening, it's tied in for another tragedy somewhere else and somewhere else, but it's almost the same tragedy happening everywhere. And so I understood how she was trying to make it fit. So that was interesting. So another scene, so she went to different places, and then you also had where she was reading stories and stuff, and she had a part where she's talking about this couple from the past that was in the South and their experience being in the South, and they kind of reported what was going on, and it was just interesting to see. So in the past, I guess it took place in Natchez, Mississippi. And the only reason why I know what Natchez, Mississippi is because a friend of mine who passed, Solongo Lee, he lived out there a few years before he passed away. And it was just so crazy to see that place again, and then in this context and stuff, and how it was still a lot of that stuff going on currently there. So it was a trip to see that in the movie, and then just showing how, in the white neighborhood, you see the cops just, driving by, smile, and everybody's happy to see Mr. So-and-so. And then he's driving down the block to the next block where all the black folks are, and he's mean mugging everybody, and everybody looking kind of, please don't come over here kind of look. Right. It's just like how, in the same breath, it's a whole different situations. And yeah, it's funny how all these movies have a situation where the narratives of others is being put on another group, and right. how they're kind of defenseless against those narratives, those oppressive narratives.
Right.
Yeah. They had a touching story in there as well about this young black boy who was on this team with his white friends, and they won the game. The black kid kind of was the MVP, and they went to go celebrate at a local pool where he wasn't welcome to get into the pool. And even though his coach was fighting for him to go, the owner of the pool didn't let the little boy in. The way that was done was so powerful. It was so, because she had her talking to the little black boy's white friend, but he was an old man now. He's like in his 70s or something like that. And he's discussing what happened that day. And she just wanted his story. He tells his story. And it's just so, and had the little kid, it's hottest day out there, and all the kids are in the pool, and he's outside the fence sitting, and some of the parents are giving him food to eat, and he's just watching the kids play. He's on the other side of the fence, and the kids want him to come in and play, and the coach giving the guy a hard time and let the little boy in. And I guess it's a compromise, but it was just, it almost hurt more to see this. But they had those little floaty things that you could sit on, and they had a little boy get into his trunks, and he's on the floaty, and this white lifeguard is telling him not to touch the water. You better not touch that water.
Yeah.
And he gets on a little floaty, he's laying there, and he got his arms tightened, pulled in front of his chest, holding still, so his feet and his arms won't touch it. And the lifeguard is walking around the pool, pulling them, and like, don't you touch that. I don't know how I felt. I know how. Well, how about this? I didn't feel good about it, but it was just so much in that. It was just so much in that. I think I almost would have sat better with him just staying outside of that fence, to be honest, because it was probably so traumatizing for him just to stay still on that floaty, so he wouldn't touch that water. Because I was thinking, like, what if that water touched him? What if his foot hit it on accident when he was trying to step in or step out? It was just like, I don't know.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think he had a choice. I think that, like, he was a little boy. He was okay. He wasn't happy on the other side of the gate, but he's probably used to, some form of that oppression.
Yeah, it could have been the first time.
Right. And so, I think what it was is, it was the guilt. It was the, we brought him all the way here. He was on the team. We told him he was going to be, able to enjoy the pool just like everybody else. And like, I think when adults get involved in stuff like that they're not used to, you know what I mean? Had they had a conversation with him and just said, hey, we don't want you to be over here, but are you okay? Maybe it would have been left alone, but they just kept pushing the like agenda of like, he needs to be like the other kids, where nobody else was accepting that. And it should have been left alone. I think he did not have a choice. That kid he didn't have any allies there that were brave enough to just say, let him be. You know what I mean?
Understood what was going on, which I wouldn't have believed if I wouldn't have saw the guy talk about it. You know what I mean? So I thought it was kind of interesting and kind of nice to have that, to see, because part of me is kind of like, it is possible. I'll say it like this: when I was a kid, some stuff I've seen I didn't understand, and being older, thinking about it, it's like, oh, that's just that, or that's just this, and so you are in a whole different world sometimes as a kid than you are an adult, and it's a lot of stuff you just go along for the ride and you don't understand what's going on. And so when the guy said he was confused and didn't know why his friend couldn't, me being cynical, my first thing is like, you knew what was going on, you wasn't that young, but then also I don't know. It's possible he didn't understand or didn't know, because it's kind of like, if they was really tripping about it that bad, how was he even on the team? So who's to say they wasn't on an out of town team and they stopped at an out of town pool where they might not be as lenient?
Right.
So,
or they had gone to that pool before, just in their leisure themselves.
Yeah.
And this is the first time the team went there.
Yeah.
To that pool. But it's the fact that he was a kid and couldn't say no. He couldn't say no to his coach, because then his coach would be like, well, you're being ungrateful because I did all this work to get you in the pool. I'm not even sure. I feel like the coach didn't know the floaty thing was going to happen, but he had to know the floaty thing was going to happen. You know what I mean? And then it becomes a point of pride for the coach too, of like, well, I made all this fuss, you know what I mean? And now, like, it's some form of him getting in the pool. There were just there should have been a stop button somewhere in there. It should have been like, okay, let's just not do this.
Yeah, to be honest, I thought that he was going to go in the pool by himself. They weren't going to let no kids go in there. And I thought his friends were maybe going to jump in there with him anyway.
Right.
And then they're going to show the owner of the pool pouring a whole bunch of bleach in there and something like that. And talking about, you guys are never coming back here again. Something like that. But once again, this is a situation where it wasn't exactly the way I thought. And it was just as powerful, and probably more powerful, because I've never seen it quite like that. Like I said, man, we just lucked out with these three movies, like, back to back, and to be able to compare them, and they wasn't so far away. Like, what happened in the other one? No, we got a chance every week to see something else, and it was kind of like, let's add this to this, let's add this to that. And you know what, me and you, we might have a fourth one. That Bob Marley movie about to come out, so that might be that might have to be on our list as well. But it's just been something, man. It's just really been something, and And this is just, like I said, the nuances that we're getting. And like I said, at first I thought it'd be like these nuances only as, Black folks or a certain culture would get it. We're seeing and noticing that everybody's kind of noticing stuff. And it's just like, this is what different folks can add to things. You know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't take much. It's just representation of truth of somebody's life or culture, or how or somebody's perspective on how they see things could make something so common different and special. Right. And special. Just how even something's shot, or what they decide to keep in versus what they take out. And so it's just a good example of that. And like I said, Ava got that eye and perspective that's just like, because I do believe, like, different directors do different things, just like with men and women. Like, men shoot stuff different than women shoot stuff, and it's not a good or bad thing. It's just a perspective and vibe of something, And I've always been aware of that. And it's funny, even before I kind of knew, like, like the men's gaze and things like that, and how people shoot in perspectives and stuff, I would notice it. I remember, and this is off topic, but I remember seeing one of the Matrix movies, and I think it was the second Matrix movie. Now, that whole movie, I know who was directing it, but it was a scene that I thought was like, they didn't do that. That's like a woman would shoot it. And there was a scene that was the main characters, Neo and Trinity, they had made it home, and it was like a love scene. It was pretty, right? And I was thinking like that's different. You know what I mean? Like, usually that's not how those scenes look. And not that it got to be all this craziness or anything. You don't have to be heavy and, whatever. But the way it was a softness, it was different. It was different. And I knew it when I saw it, and I thought I was weird. To the point where when it came out later on, I listened to a commentary, they said, oh, the second director directed this scene while we were directing something else, and it was a female. And I was like, I knew it. I knew it.
Right.
I knew it. Like I said, the perspective that she has and that she's doing in this, it lends to the subject matter in a way that I don't think a guy would do in the same way. Just like I don't think she would have did American Fiction that way. There was some stuff in there that would have to come from him. But I'm just saying, even within the same community, the perspective is strong enough for it to stand out in different ways. And that's why it's so important, for different folks to be able to see things a certain kind of way and present it a certain kind of way.
Right.
Even when it's minute. But for this kind of movie, I needed her and her eye to kind of guide me through it.
I wanted to speak to, the part where you talked about the little kid being interviewed, and her having to interview him because obviously she had missed, the little Black child that experienced that. But just the fact that, like, I've often thought about, like, I wonder what those folks that were throwing, rocks and stuff at the Little Rock, kids and Ruby Bridge and, all of that kind of stuff. What are they doing now? You know what I mean? Do they understand, as time went on that it was wrong? And do they feel, kind of different? So when she interviewed this person, I like the fact that it wasn't scripted. It wasn't like, I assume this was an actor, but it felt like it was a real person. It felt like she had got the real person, because he was just like, I don't, stumbling over his words and just like, I wish I could have done more. I still feel bad to this day, all of that. It felt real. It didn't feel like it was staged. You know what I mean? So
it did feel very authentic. It did.
Yeah. I was glad she did it that way.
It was funny because I thought when you said that, what are they doing now? It's like they own football and basketball teams. Like, what do you mean? They're senators. What do you mean? Where are they? You know where they are.
Right. Well, not that whole, where are they now? But
they're in Congress.
Right.
Then they find old pictures of what's his name, and they was like, hey, isn't that you in the background? Yelling, go home N-word to those people. Why you going to school? Or coach told us not to go there. Then why'd you didn't listen to your coach? You were there yelling at them black kids trying to go to school.
Right.
Yeah, we know where they are.
Some of them might be married to black people, though. I'm optimistic.
And what does that mean? What they got to do with them and how they treat and feel about us? What they got to do with anything? So she goes to India and talk about this group of people that are the untouchables. The part in there where a speech with Martin Luther King where he had went to India and they had said he was an untouchable and he was confused by the term and what it meant, which was very powerful to hear, and how that was overlaid with the people and stuff like that. That was very powerful. I thought it was really neat too when she ended up going back home and she's kind of collecting all of her thoughts and her stories. And that's when she kind of got the idea, just like, I need to go ahead and finish this home. That's her metaphor for her arc in her new chapter in her life. And then also tied into her story and narrative about how with things we can't just keep covering it up. For us to move forward, we need to discuss, fix, and repair before we move on. And I thought that was very powerful, poignant. I also thought it was interesting too when she was sitting there going over her writings and stuff like that, how she was sitting there and under the table there was this Monopoly board, which I thought was kind of interesting. I'm like, yeah. As far as when they talk about the caste system and people ruling and owning and being over things and just how us being, a commodity, us is more about capitalism on the back of black people and stuff. Just, so seeing that Monopoly board meant something different to me when I saw it after she kind of had that conversation and that discussion on her journey for the information for her story that she's going to write. I'm like, Monopoly.
Right. But how did you feel about the whole kind of theory of the caste system and racism? Because what I remember her initially kind of saying was that, when she was talking about Trayvon and, don't even want to say his name, but Zimmerman, she said, how can a Mexican, I think his father is white, but how can a Mexican, be like racist towards, another person of color, basically. And she was saying because it's not racism, it's caste, and she mentioned that when she went to India, she said it's brown people, they're all brown people. So how is it, racism? So it was interesting for her to come up with the concept and really just, and just really push that theory that it's not all based on, it's not based on racism. She didn't even say it's not all. She just said it's based on a caste system. So what did you think about that?
It's a take on it. I heard a caste system before because of, in India. So I heard that before. So, like I said, I think for her and the audience that she was trying to explain and make sense out of it, I think that she had to tie stuff together to make it relatable. Now, do I agree with some of the stuff? Yeah. Because like I said, once again, things are similar, but it doesn't mean it's exactly the same. And regardless of what you're calling it, I just know, like, either people are in the hole because of bad luck, or is it because it's a trap door? They're in the hole. And the problem is, it's a pit. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. So regardless of what you call it or how you got there, let's recognize the problem. And names and stuff are important, but it's almost kind of like, too, we would still call it racism here. Right. And calling it caste wouldn't change the fact of who's falling in that pit or going through those problems or getting pulled over by the police or not getting a loan or getting harassed in the store or a woman holding their purse or people being afraid or thinking the worst thing about a certain culture.
Right.
I don't think calling it caste would help that.
Or our caste is a different system.
Yeah, racism.
Right. That's what it is.
But if you're trying to explain to the masses, I guess, or get empathy, or to, just like how she was talking about, hey, my mom, your mom, my dad, your dad, she did the same thing with the book. Mm-hmm. And it's not wrong at all. It's not wrong at all. That was her way. But, for most of us, we don't need a book or instructions to feel empathy or to understand that it's not just us. I think we see when other people are hurt. I think we see when other people are being treated wrong, because we step in when it's not none of our business. Mm-hmm. We're always seeing and trying to make things right and make things fair in spite of, I don't know too many folks who will be on the short end of the stick and still trying to help the ones that not even as low as they are and still trying to help out and fix and make right or trying to tend to. I think it's just kind of like in our nature to do that. So a lot of times, some people might need the long way around to get to certain answers and stuff. But I'm kind of like her cousin was like, tell it to me straight. Mm-hmm.
I think from a perspective of like, if you were raised in America and, and all is handed down, oppression, you know what I'm saying? And that's why I say, this erasure of like African American history, you can't erase people's family history. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not going anywhere as long as those stories are told. But I think that if that's all and then, a book like this comes out to basically kind of show you what's going on in other places, especially talking about how when Hitler came to rise, how they used our situation here, the oppression and racism, as a blueprint, for theirs. And that scene was powerful. We didn't even, talk about that they were like, look at this, and used it from a perspective that was different, because they were just basically like, their issue with the Jews was just that they were, I don't know. I think the way that she said it was they were white just like them. You know what I mean? Like, they looked just like them. They just had more than them. They had more money. They had more luxury, all of those things. And they wanted to get rid of that, So that part was powerful, because not a lot of people think about that when they think about the Holocaust. We know that, like, they've robbed them and gotten rid of, a lot of their belongings and stuff like that and all of those things. But like, I knew about the blueprint because I had read Stamp and other books. And I was like, of course, I didn't learn this when I was in school. This is me as an adult learning this kind of stuff. And we know that this stuff isn't being taught in schools. It's still going to take people to like push that button on Netflix to say, I want to see this. You know what I mean? It's still going to take people to go into the theater and want to see this kind of stuff, to be educated about it if they're not, particularly educated about it. So
Okay, so people who get their awareness from like books and stuff like that and movies, and that's where they get perspective from because they're in a situation where they wouldn't get it anywhere else, is equivalent to Black people knowing that, we have cops that are bullies and will just mess with us, and folks not believing us until it was caught on film. And then even with that, they still thought the person deserved it. You think any Black person was kind of like, what do you mean cops harassing Black people? And do you think the ones that didn't experience it themselves still believed the ones that were saying that was happening? Did we wait for a video to come out? We were like, aha, confirmation. Unfortunately, we had to have this on film, but we didn't wait for it to be on film to believe it if we didn't experience ourselves.
But then there's folks who didn't know about it, who are a lot of times when, stuff like this comes out, and then there's the moment of clarity and the moment of like, trying to relate, to stuff that they've seen and stuff like that. That might happen from this, from this film. That might happen.
But I'm saying for the most part, we wouldn't need this. It's almost like the equity conversations and stuff. Like we preaching to the choir. I guess that's the best way to put it. A lot of stuff is like preaching to the choir. We know, and there are some that deny, or want to forget about it or whatever. And I think it's some people who honestly don't know. And it's almost like a conversation we had talking before, and it was probably on the American Fiction one, was talking about a lot of times the stories that are being shared or the plight of Black folks, they wouldn't know unless they had a Black kid that they adopted or had a Black baby before they start understanding and seeing like, oh, wait a minute, this world is messed up. Like, oh, okay, yeah. Or like I was saying before about the pool, and everybody's in the pool and, they wake up and I'm in the pool too. Yes, this pool was always here, and we was always here dealing with this stuff. This is not new to you because you're part of it now in a way that you got pulled into it.
Right.
By marriage, by, adoption, by having a kid, by whatever, something, and that's why sometimes, like I said, people could get like thrown off because like they eyes are open, they see like this is the whole thing going on and it's around them. And it's just like, yeah, but we've been here. A lot of times we already know, and not that we know everything and all that kind of stuff, but it's just kind of like, we just got to the party a long time ago.
Right. And that goes back to that American Fiction part. Yeah.
About swimming and no shore and no shore to see, and you're tired. You're still underwater. But
yeah.
And not saying we can't learn nothing from it, but I'm just saying from who's asking her to write the book and who's requesting it, that's just like Monk had to write a book and he's writing for an audience, and the audience wanted a thing from him, even though he thought they would reject it, but they wanted it. They wanted her take, and she gave the take that, that they could process. You would have to go to her to get that story, but they know that she would give it to them in a certain kind of way, right? The way they could digest it, I'm sure.
It's interesting.
If she was writing for us, don't you think it'd be a different way? You think she had to go to India to explain why Trayvon Martin happened? You can save your flying miles for that. You would have to go to India for that. You think her cousin? You think her family? You think that she had to explain to them what happened? The whole thing was Trayvon Martin, how they got there. Like, how could this happen, right? Like, the dude was racist, and he was living on privilege, the way the things are stacked and people are, designated as a certain thing, regardless of actual race. Just like we're designated in a certain kind of way, regardless of, And so to explain, I don't think we would need a book to explain why Trayvon Martin and how that could happen. But I'm saying I wouldn't. It'd be interesting, but I'm just saying, I put it like this. It's kind of like how I know how, I don't know, it'd be equivalent to me knowing how a book ends already, but then I just might want more detail about it, and I listen to the director's commentary or artist talk or writer's talk. just for extra insight and stuff. But it's not that I didn't know how it happened. Like, I already knew how it happened and probably why it happened. I would, because the question was, why would that happen with Trayvon, right? So, you know, that's for those who don't know or don't understand how it can happen. To the point where the president got backlash for saying that Trayvon could have been his son. How would that be mistaken? How could that be taken in the wrong way? A kid, black kids get murdered for wearing a hoodie. Black presidents say that could have been my kid. And that's the wrong thing to say? So I got what that meant. I don't need a book. I don't need to hear about no caste system for that. Not for that. When that woman was at the airplane pointing at Obama like he was a little child, I understand why that happened. Regardless of the caste system or whatever, I know racism. And I know how that works and the disrespect. And even with the authority of the president, just a boy to him.
But do you take the history of it, which is, you know, obviously one of the things that she was kind of mentioning of, like, why this was the caste system that we have was created, like you said, capitalism and all of that kind of stuff, that it wasn't based on race initially, that it was based on what you mentioned before, capitalism. And then it kind of went into this, you know, this area that we are presently in. Well, you know, that happened with the indentured servants. They got along with the slaves, you know, and they got along so well that that's when they came up with the let's give them property, you know, let's make them slave catchers. And that premise of, like, you know, even the lowest man, you know,
was
that
higher than the highest black person.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that could be based off of, like, capitalism. You said racism before. That could be based off the caste system in that sense, because it's about money. You know what I'm saying? Like,
call it what you want. I'm just saying.
Okay, say it.
It's just, you know, like I said, she's not wrong. That's fine. Like I said, for the purpose of the book and for enlightenment and to kind of give, like, you know, help people find their way to understanding of the current situation. For those who need to see that or have examples, that was a great example and a great narrative to walk and lead to understanding of our current situation that we have here, what we call racism.
Right.
And it's called caste system over in India because it related to what was going on over there. And sometimes names are different names because they have different nuances for different things. So depending on where it is, it's probably called something different. But it could be very similar in behavior. Right. Yeah.
I agree with that. Because it shows that with India, and it shows it with Germany as well, that they looked alike. They were the same color, you know.
So I put it like this: I am not in petition of changing the word racism to caste here necessarily, right? Because I feel like what we're dealing with here is a little bit different. But when it's in the same race or same culture, then call it caste. When it's separate, race and culture, then I think racism would be, you know, because anyone came.
Say it.
Racism was given, right? Races were given, right, to be in categories. So I think that's why the word racism is there, because that's how it was divided in when it was established here.
Right.
So therefore, that's why you use the word. That's like somebody making burgers and somebody be like, oh, we call it tacos over here, but here we don't, because that's not what we use. Buns versus tortilla shells.
Right.
So it could be the same thing, but it's different here because it has different kind of nuances. And since things are broken up by race here, I think that's why the racism part comes from. And if we were like in, say, Africa, and the same thing was happening and it was like a hierarchy, then we would probably call it caste system,
right?
In that situation. But we're not all here the same,
right? As you said, it's as we're saying, it's a construct. You know, racism is basically of that. You know, which is different from what we've seen and what we know from other countries.
Yes, the caste system wouldn't necessarily apply here, but does it have similarities? Yes.
Right. There you go.
Oh, I'm trying. I'm trying. I think I did good. I slipped a little bit, but I think I did good. I think
What did you slip on?
I brought it back. In.
What did you slip on?
Nothing. I landed. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie. In the end, when they kind of showed all the people along her journey, from the couples who wrote about racism, who documented their experiences, the black and the white couples, the couple with the German man and the Jewish woman and all they went through.
Right. The Indian guy, what he went through. And that was a very powerful story too, about regardless of where they try to say you are, that doesn't determine who you are. And we end with Trayvon Martin, which was just, even though it wasn't real, to see him, our last representation of him is seeing him alive, feeds me in a way which I am grateful for. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if it's not the reality, I'll take it.
Right. And I feel like that gaze was held the longest. Obviously, it was at the end, but I think the gaze for us was held long. You know what I mean? Kind of looking at him and thinking about all of those things.
Plus, I believe, like, you know, it's really, the journey was because of him. It started off with him. It's his story, basically.
Right.
And all that stuff was to circle around to get back to him. Like I say, it was kind of put perspective and to lead to understanding of what happened to him. Like I said, I thought it was a long way around, but it was a roundabout way of getting to how we got to this point. But I think it was in a way, it was more of being able to relate and how we have a lot more in common than we think. And how we all are susceptible to systems that we didn't ask to be a part of.
Right.
And regardless of
the architect,
regardless of where you are still, like I said, susceptible to the system, regardless. Right. And so to show that, I thought that was interesting. But like I said, as far as like the situation with Trayvon, I think that's a whole different thing. But it was neat to see all these other injustices and some of the framework of how situations came about and things like that. It wasn't just Trayvon's story. It was a whole bunch of other people's stories as well. And it was neat how she included all those different things into this story. I thought there was a lot in it, just different cultures, the different systems of oppression, the different stories, her journey trying to find it, the fact of the loss in her life, her interracial relationship with her husband, how that was worked out, the part he played, the type of person he was, dealing with sick parent and incorporating that into her life, her finding herself after losing herself, her avoiding something but still having to be that thing, even though she didn't want to be, but being better because she said yes, even though she got there herself the long way around, and the benefits that came from her saying yes and going through what she went through, and not being able to give us what she gave us if it wasn't for all those things. You know, her pain and the pains of others, the heartaches and the heartaches of others, they all fed into the perspective and the journey that she came up with to share in her book. Yeah.
Could have been a documentary.
Who knows? It might
Glad
still
it wasn't.
Be.
Yeah, that's
still
true.
Might, Ava, because she'll do Netflix in a minute. You know, she ain't tripping. So there might be a thing. But I like how she did it. For me, I like how she did it. And like I said, it was a journey, and it was a lot. Like I said, my eyes got a little foggy quite a few times. But like I said, I didn't feel defeated. I felt kind of like you kind of share an experience with a friend. It's a hard experience, but you wasn't alone when you went through it, and it felt like that. And so Yeah, beautiful movie, very powerful, very powerful. The acting was, the stories were, the journey was.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said before, it was a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
And that's how, movies used to make you feel. So I'm glad there's, some allegiance to that. Like, we're not just going to make this movie, we're going to make it impactful.
And once again, this wasn't even a movie that went through the Hollywood normal railroad, this kind of circumvented the system.
Mm-hmm.
Like how many of these kind of stories are getting lost, because trust me, if it was brought to you by whatever large corporation or large studio, they wouldn't have no heart, and the fact that somebody like Ava, after she done proved herself, still trying to fight for, that's like Spike Lee still trying to fight for money. What? Right. Somebody telling too much truth if you been in the game for 30 years and you still an independent artist.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, that's street cred. It's not great for him, but part of me is proud.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Part of me is just proud. And you still did it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some benefits to that independent filmmaking.
Right.
To be able to have your say and keep it in there. You know what I mean? Make the film that you want to make.
Right. Because like I said, on all three of these movies, I know if they went through a different kind of filter, all the stuff that would have been cut. I know all the stuff. And all the stuff that would have been cut would probably have been the main things that really meant something to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's funny how that goes. All right. Did you have any final words?
Go see this film. I said about the other one.
It's true.
I'm glad it came out. I want to say it didn't come out during Black History Month, but I'm glad it came out around this time, because we know the standard stuff is the downtrodden stuff that's usually shown on TV around this time of the month. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to be able to have 3 films that are, uplifting in a sense, and pays homage to our history, is incredible for this time of year. 3. And like you said, with Bob Marley's film coming out, the other one, the one that we spoke about before, the Magical Negro one coming out sometime soon. It's a good time. It's a good time for us,
Yeah. And they're just different too. They're all different.
Yeah.
I'm surely not saying just because it's different, it makes it good. I'm not saying that at all. It could be different and very bad, but we've been lucky. And I include the blackening with this as well. I just think I think it's just really cool that we get these different movies, and they all kind of have something special about them. And I just, like I said, if anything, it's just proof of concept.
Right.
And I'm looking forward to the next one that we see. This has been good. We, like I said, 3 movies, and I feel that in a way they all interconnected in a way, and we kind of referred to different ones while talking about them, interchanging with different movies that kind of relate. It's been really cool, and it's been great once again sitting with you and discussing.
Yeah, you got deep on this one. Just kidding. No, this one was I feel like there's more discussion that could obviously be had, you know what I mean, along with what we just talked about, but it's the sitting with it that I enjoy the most, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just the parts that when we finish this, if we think about it later on, we'll be like, oh yeah, that was, this part right here we didn't talk about, because there was so many things in that film that mattered. And I would, highly recommend it. I probably will most likely see it again myself, just to be able to sit with it and look through, oh yeah, this is the part that I wanted some time to just kind of focus on. Yeah, just grateful to be able to do this podcast during Black History Year.
Every day.
During American history in this podcast, because that's what it is.
That's right. Every day.
So the American History podcast. So I'm grateful that we were able to do this, because this is mighty powerful, and
that's right.
More to come.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. It's been Jay and Sebrenia. Until next time, peace.
I don't have a catchphrase, so I'll just say good night.
Peace.
Peace to you too.